The only difference in drugs and racing is a cure for drugs.
This is the new Asheville Motor Speedway, or what's left of it. This place was an absolutely legendary circuit here in Western North Carolina, and it was colloquially known around here as the river because there is a river right behind the backstretch. This place has been silent for almost 30 years. It's been largely forgotten about, but it is important because there are some NASCAR stars who have won here, some other racing drivers that you've heard of who gained their popularity right here. And man, it's got some incredible stories to tell. So by the end of this video, you're gonna hear all these stories. You're gonna meet some cool guys, and I may just be eating a hot dog somewhere in between with one of the coolest drivers who's ever raced Cup. So you're gonna wanna stick around for that. This place was built in 1960. It was an old airstrip is what it used to be. We're at the west end of where the runway would have been. The east end would have been off behind turns 3 and 4. It gained some notoriety actually really quickly because the Cup Series ended up hosting a race here that very first season. It was a race that was won by Jack Smith, who was a regular competitor on the Cup Series circuit at the time. And NASCAR would end up holding 7 more Cup Series races throughout the 60s and early 70s right here. And some very notable names, some Hall of Famers ended up winning here. People like Richard Petty and Ned Jarrett. Many other incredible racing drivers raced here. People like David Pearson, people like Junior Johnson.
You know, Ralph Earnhardt, Dickie Plemons, Jack Ingram, Harry Gett, Morgan Shepherd, Bob Pressley. Richard Petty ran here. You know, they ran Cup races for a while. And I mean, just pretty much a who's who. Ronnie Silvers, he was successful being a crew chief for Michael Waldrop.
So that's Kerry Bodenhamer, and he, along with Nick Ogle and Danny Lunsford, are some of the drivers who used to race here. They've won here, they've won championships here, and they're able to tell stories about these places. And man, they've got some stories to tell.
Oh, I guess the most dramatic things that I remember were the fights between Boscolo and Bob Pressley. Sometimes it would be Bob and Jack. Remember one night, a lady got mad at, what was that, George Miller? We used to hang out, Dad would drop us off in the infield and we just hung out with our friends. Well, Bob Presley's wife threw a beer bottle in George Miller's car, and that scared me to death. I didn't know what was going on. Young and innocent. Saw my first drunk hanging out in the infield, staggering up to the concession stand.
A lot of memories here. One of them was the big fire over in the turn over here between Billy Husky and Pete Silva.
What happened?
Well, I didn't actually see the wreck. They were ahead of me, and when I come down the backstretch, there was a huge fire, and I jammed on the brakes, and of course my car spun, and when it spun, the motor died, and I could feel the heat on my neck from the fire. That's how close I was to it. And I hit the button. I said, please, good Lord, let it start. And it started, and I drove around, come back in the pits backwards, and I was really concerned whether they got out of the car or not because it was such a massive fire. And then somebody told me, yeah, they both got out of the car. And of course, it burned a hole in the racetrack, and that ended the race that night. We couldn't race anymore that night.
Used to down off of turn 2 there, it had a armor guardrail, like interstate guardrail, and it got knocked over with Jim Herron run the place, and he'd form it up and pour concrete over when they had it free, you know. They never straightened the guardrail up. So when you'd hit it, it's sort of like a ramp. You'd almost wind up in the river if you wasn't careful. But had a couple get close, but never got in there.
You know, most people would argue that the glory days of this track were after Cup left. They had their last race here in 1971 when NASCAR consolidated their schedule. And the 70s and 80s and on into the 90s gave This area of North Carolina, some of the most incredible racing. You know, we're talking about some just insane action, insane stories.
I guess the first celebrity that I knew or met that I didn't really know at the time was Dale Earnhardt Sr. or Ralph Earnhardt. And of course, I was a race fan. I'd get out of school and come straight to the racetrack, and he was down here practicing. I asked him, he's loading his car up. I said, well, where are you going, Mr. Earnhardt? He said, I'm going home. I said, why? He said, I can't get this car to work. And I said, well, they don't race till tonight. And he said, boy, I've had all week to work on it. And said, if I can't fix it in a week, I can't fix it in a couple hours. So he loaded up, went back home. He had a problem with his car.
My dad started racing down here the year they opened it, and it was our life for, I don't know how many years, till 99, I guess, every Friday night. Dad won his first race down here in a hobby car and didn't know the race was over, said it was so dusty he couldn't see the checkered flag in the hobby class. I guess we always knew we would race eventually. Dad told us down here one night we got mad at him because he wouldn't outrun his boss man, Jack Ingram, who he worked for, and he said, boys, this is my damn race car, and I'm gonna drive it like I want to. When you get one, you can drive yours the way you want to.
And the first time I ever got in a race car and come out the end of pit road over there, my legs were shaking so bad I couldn't change the gears. Well, I mean, I got them changed, but I was nervous, let's put it that way. And made a few laps, and I was following Mike Messer down through here. And he spun over here and won, and being very inexperienced, I jammed on the brakes and hit him right in the driver's door and tore the car all to pieces. I come back, they hauled it in the pits, and my brother said, you tore this car up and never made 5 laps. He said, but we'll fix it and we'll come back. So we did, and you know, I started a career and raced here at Greenville Pickens, Newport, Hickory. But this was my favorite racetrack.
I met my wife here and had a blessed 52 years with her. And the infield was full of fans. It wasn't full of race cars. There were just a fence down the backside of pit road, and they parked in front of us. And there was her and a guy, and I thought it was her husband. And we got to talking one night. She said, no, that's my brother. And one thing led to another. She grew up with Leo and Richard Jackson that owned Precision Products that wound up holding the Skoal car. And she was a race fan, and we just hit it off, and couldn't ask for a better situation, you know. So that's probably the biggest highlight of my racing on the river, was meeting my wife.
With this place being known locally as the River, it really had a reputation. I mean, thousands and thousands of people used to come here on Friday nights and watch the races. It was really a family affair. In fact, a lot of the crazy fans were called the River Rats. They had their whole community here. And it's just so sad to see that all that history, all that legacy is pretty much non-existent. It's just in the past.
I don't know what part of the population of Buncombe County was down here, but the stands were always full. Always full. Everybody, you going to the river Friday night? Yeah, I'll be there.
It was a place, there'd probably be 4,000 people here every Friday night, and they'd sit in the same seats. I mean, if you wanted to see somebody, you know where to look in the grandstands to see them. And, you know, if you got in somebody's seat, somebody tell you can't sit there, it's somebody else's seat. And it was a Friday night ritual. I mean, you know, they opened at 3 o'clock, run 10, 15 minutes of practice, you raced and was home by midnight, and it was just a really family-oriented environment. My mother used to bring a truck and park where you go across the racetrack there, and she'd always bring groceries for my crew, and Banjo and Leo and all those guys would come by and they'd eat, and it just like a big family reunion every Friday night. Now, we get a little mad when we raced each other, but we get over it.
In fact, across the street, way over there, there's a hill, and there used to be some lower income housing developments up that way. And the stories about that hill, there used to be people that would go up there and watch the races.
Oh, up here in the trees and up on the bank, it was always full of people sitting, climbing in the trees and sitting on the bank.
Ultimately, the track promoter wasn't really happy with people watching the races from that hill, and Mr. Light was the name of the track promoter. He ended up putting a bunch of billboards along that road out front so that people couldn't watch the races from that hill, which I'm sure if you were somebody climbing in those trees, if you were a kid climbing in those trees, you had to be so disappointed about that. You know, walking around this place and looking at how tight this thing is, I mean, I can just only imagine some of the wrecks that happened here.
I had several bad wrecks right here at this racetrack, several. And one was with Frankie Miller. Bob Pressley and Lloyd Slagle come down to my trailer, and they sit down on the fender, and they said, look here, we got something to tell you. And I said, what's that? And they said, Frankie Miller's gonna wreck you tonight. And I said, why in the world would he want to do that? And they said, well, they said, we've antagonized him this week about not being able to outrun you, and he's gonna wreck you. He said, if he can't outrun you, he'll wreck you. And I said, okay, well, I said, he's got one problem. He can't catch me. But what I didn't plan on was when I come to lap him. And on lap 11 of the feature, we come off the fourth turn over here. He caught me in the left rear and started trying to spin me. And I kept turning to the right and stayed on the gas pedal till we got to the middle of 1 and 2. And I turned my car right and let off the gas pedal. He went by me and I turned under him. And then I turned back into his driver's door, and we hit the backfield gate abruptment back there, or I did, and tore my car up pretty good. I got out of the car and I walked back to his car before the safety personnel got over there, and I told him, I said, Frankie, if you ever touch my car again, I'll kill you. And I turned around and walked off. My wife was standing at the end of the bleachers over there when I walked down the racetrack there. She said to me, she said, are you hurt? I said, no, I'm not hurt, but I've tore that car up bad. They took 2 wreckers to pick it up, one in the front, one in the back. They brought it to the pits, and they set it on my trailer. It wouldn't roll. And I got home that night. She was standing in the middle of the living room floor crying. She said, what are we going to do now? I said, oh, I'm going to fix it. She said, oh, you can't fix it. She said, it's tore up too bad. I said, well, I built it. I ought to be able to fix it. Took me 6 weeks, but I fixed it and made it back to the racetrack.
You know, I really hate to interrupt this video, but making these videos actually takes a lot out of me, and I am really getting hungry. And fortunately, I know just the perfect place to go for lunch here in Asheville. So why don't you join me there and we'll come right back. If you know anything about Asheville and Asheville's racing community, then you've probably heard of Celebrities Hot Dogs. This place is located only a few miles from the new Asheville site, and it is owned by former NASCAR Cup Series driver and new Asheville Speedway legend Robert Pressley. Obviously, Robert and his dad had quite some success at New Asheville Speedway, and Robert would end up going to drive in the Cup Series for several seasons. But after he retired from the Cup Series, he opened this place up, and it's been open for the last 20 years. Robert still works here 5 days a week, and they've served some great food and have some great photos and other memorabilia throughout the restaurant. I want to thank Robert Pressley for his kindness and hospitality when I visited there. It was a great meal, so I highly recommend you stop in here. I'm going to jump back to the track, but thank you so much, Celebrities Hot Dogs. You know, standing here, it's hitting me a lot harder than I thought it would be, because I feel like I'm standing on hallowed ground here, because there's so many stories, so many drivers, incredible moments happen right here, and it's been silent. It's been gone for so long. And sadly, that's the case for so many racetracks around the country, which is why I'm setting off on this mission to chronicle as many former and current tracks as possible, to preserve their history, tell their story, but really advocate for local racing in America, because we got to save the tracks that we have left.
It was very good for the city of Asheville, tax-wise, economy. Just any Friday night, you could find anywhere from 3,500 to 5,000 fans at this racetrack. And the high schools around here run the concession stands, and they made money off of it. And you know, it was just an economic boost to this area, in my opinion. And that's why I hated to see it close. You know, it affected a lot of people when it closed. A lot of people made their living here at this racetrack.
Sadly, this place actually met a very terrible demise. In the late 90s, there were some rumors about this track being for sale.
I had asked the promoters at the time, you know, if it was going to close, and they assured me that the racetrack would be here the next year, and it was here, and it's still here, but they failed to mention that they had sold it.
The last drivers meeting here in 97, or 98, I guess it was, Roger Gregg came to the drivers meeting, and he said, there's rumors going around that this racetrack's been sold. He said, I want to assure all of you that this racetrack's not been sold, and I want you to go home and fix your cars and be ready to come back here next year. So that was how we left the drivers meeting that night. Well, I think it was 2 weeks later on a Saturday when my wife come home from work and she brought the newspaper in and she said, "Have you seen the paper today?" I said, "No, honey, I haven't seen the paper." She said, "The racetrack's been sold." It, like a knife in my heart. You know, I said, "What do you mean the race?" She said, "The headlines of the paper says the racetrack's been sold." Said they, you know, and there won't be no more racing there. Well, the fans and the drivers and people begged the city for one more year, and so they give us the final thunder, as they called it, you know, one more year, 40 years of racing here. And they give us 99, and when I left here in September of 99, the last race of the season, I went home and never sat down in another race car. That was the end of my career.
The Biltmore House, they're located about a mile off of Turn 2, and they were doing some development, and it sounded like they were really concerned about the noise, and so they got with the city of Asheville to ultimately purchase the track and convert it into what it is now, which is a public park. I'm walking on what actually really was the track. They kept the layout of a track pretty much the same and converted it into what is something called a velodrome, which is something that is used in the cycling community, I guess, for racing. But they slightly increased the banking just a little bit, but primarily the layout of the racetrack is still the same. You can basically come and walk it. You can even race on it. You just can't race cars here, you know. But it's just really sad to see it the way it is.
I mean, it was a packed place on Friday night, and like I said, it was a family atmosphere, and you know, to lose that and lose the people. Of course, a lot of us a lot of them's passed now and moved on, but there's just so many good memories made that it's like losing. When the racetrack closed, it's like, you know, Thanksgiving at Grandma's house quit. You know, people go different ways, do different things, and it's really a tough deal.
My emotions were really hurt. You know, I just didn't believe it was happening. You know, especially with the way with the fans and the camaraderie between the competitors and the officials, and you know, it was just heartbreaking for me to hear that this racetrack was no longer going to be here for racing. We used to come here every once in a while, a bunch of us, and sit around and just talk old racing, bench race we call it, you know, talk about memories and stuff like that. And but emotionally, I didn't like it. Let's put it that way.
You know, sadly, if you know anything about Western North Carolina, you know in 2024 that Hurricane Helene really damaged this part of the country, and this site was no different. As I told you, there's a river off the backstretch, and this place absolutely flooded. I mean, there was so much damage here. Fortunately, the track, you know, still being a permanent fixture with concrete walls, it really wasn't destroyed, but the playground area on the infield really took a beating. There were so many parts really got destroyed. I mean, I'm here in 2026 and you can still see so much damage that you can still see left over. And it's just really sad to see, but fortunately, this track still exists even despite that damage. It actually wasn't the first time this place flooded though, because in 1964, there was a smaller flood that flooded this track. So this building behind me is the last real building that's still standing here from the racetrack. It was the bathrooms to the park before the hurricane hit. Obviously it's still closed, but this was the original press box. The pay window was right here. Concessions were right there. In fact, there was a second concession stand on the infield, but it's really cool to still see it. It's been quite heavily damaged in the hurricane, but it is still standing right where the start-finish line would have been. So we're standing in what would have been turn 3, and right over there, that building used to be an engine shop. In fact, it was an engine shop for over 62 years until the hurricane hit and flooded it out. But that's where some racing engines were built. And then just beyond that, there used to be some race shops over there too. This part of the country in Asheville used to be a hotbed for racing, but sadly no longer is. If you're gonna wanna find any sort of local short track asphalt racing in Western North Carolina, you're either gonna have to go all the way down the mountain to places like Hickory, or you're gonna have to go into South Carolina to places like Anderson. So that's just the sad reality of this place. Just it used to be a hotbed and it's no longer that condition anymore. As I sit here and walk around the quiet premises of where this track once roared, I can't help but notice the people that come here to get their exercise or walk their dogs or play with their children. Most of these people have no idea the greatness that once was here. And sadly, far too many places across America are like that. We've got to support our local racing. And yes, we know it's not what it once was, but there's still racing going on. I can't help but listening to these old timers, as they call themselves, talk about racing and hear the pain that they have.
When you've done something all your life, it's hard to quit. I told somebody the only difference in drugs and racing is a cure for drugs. How much of a cure for racing? When you get it, you got it, you know. You're that drunk and quit, but you always got a six-pack in the refrigerator just in case.
And this is why I've made it my personal mission to travel and chronicle these stories and save history. So many tracks have disappeared and so many stories have gone with it. I'm so inspired by the story of Nick Ogle, who spent nearly his entire life here at this site with his family. Or the story of Kerry Bodenhamer, who literally met his wife at this track. These are just a few of thousands of stories that have come from one site, but imagine the millions and millions of stories that have come from both racetracks past and present. The passion of the people that I've met so far has been immeasurable, but the pain is so noticeable. That is exactly why we need to support the racetracks that we have left. So I'm pleading with you, go and buy a ticket and support the track that's close to you. I'll leave you with Danny Lunsford, whose pride for New Asheville Motor Speedway just flows out of him like a river.
They ended up putting a monument here to remember the racetrack, which was a good thing in my opinion. On that monument over there, the last sentence on it says, former driver Danny Lunsford said this is a one-of-a-kind place.
Nah, not that I know of. Probably do, but some of them I probably couldn't put on film, but
You sure can.
nah.
Well, it looks like somebody got a little high in turn 4. Uh-oh. Completely eliminate racing here.
That was the drunk section down here in one. I don't remember. You know,
Yeah.
they kind of designated drunks.